So in this session, we will discuss the weekly homework related to ionic bonding. In the first question, sodium react with chlorine to form sodium chloride. Which statement describe what happened to sodium atom in this reaction? So when sodium react with chlorine, when we check the periodic table, in a periodic table you will find the position of sodium in group 1. So when you check the position of a sodium, sodium is in group 1, so sodium is a metal. And when you check the position of chlorine, chlorine belongs to group 7, so group 7 means it will be a non-metal. And what happened in ionic bond, a formation of ionic bond, the metal tend to lose electron, whereas the non-metal tend to gain electron. So the attraction between the positive and the negative ion is known as the ionic bond. So in the question they are asking that sodium is reacting with chlorine to form a compound sodium chloride. So which statement describe what happened to sodium atom in this reaction? So sodium atom, what happened, because it is a metal, and what is the tendency of the metal? The tendency of the metal is to lose electron. And whenever something will lose electron, the number of electron is less, so it will have more proton or it will form a positive ion. So metal will lose electron and it will form a positive ion. So statement 1, that sodium atoms form a positive ion and sodium atom loses electron, and statement 4, both are correct. So what could be the right answer? B will be the right answer for this. In question 2, the electronic structure of atom Q and R are shown. Q and R form an ionic compound. What is the formula of the compound? So how we can work out the formula of ionic compound? We have to first identify the group. When we check the group number means the number of electron in the last shell. So when we check the group of Q, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. So there are 7 electrons in the last shell for Q. So Q belongs to group 7. And what about R? When we check the group number of R, there is only 1 electron in the last shell. So R belongs to group 1. And what is the valency of the group 7? So as we know, the valency of the group 7 is -1. And what is the valency of the group 1? The valency of the group 1 is +1. To write a chemical formula, we simplify the valency and then cross multiply. It is already simplified. So when we cross multiply the valency, so the formula will be RQ, or we can also say QR. That's why C is the right answer for this. If any question you want me to repeat, you can use the chat or you can use your mic. Then question 3, metal P react with non-metal Q. So P is reacting with Q. Which process take place and which type of compound is formed? So when metal combined with a non-metal, so which kind of bonding is there? Metal combined with non-metal, it will be ionic. So either B will be answered or D will be answered. And then what happened, because metal is there, the metal tend to lose electron where non-metal tend to gain electron. So electron is transferred from metal to non-metal. So it will transfer from P to Q. That's why B will be the right answer. As the electron transfer from metal to a non-metal, metal will form a positive ion, where non-metal will form a negative ion. In question 4, in which ionic compound do the metal ion and the non-metal ion have the same electronic structure or same number of electrons? So how we can work out this? We have to use a periodic table. The first option is calcium oxide. So in calcium oxide, when we check the periodic table, so we have calcium and oxygen. Calcium and oxygen react with each other to form a compound which we call calcium oxide. Calcium is having this number is representing the proton number, or for atom the proton number and the electron number will be same. So this 20 is representing the number of electrons in calcium. So there are 20 electrons in calcium atom, and there are 8 electrons in oxygen atom. But when they react with each other, when calcium is reacting with oxygen, how they react? Because the calcium belongs to group 2, so calcium will lose 2 electrons. And group 6, the valency is -2. So if valency is -2, what does it mean? It means it will gain 2 electrons. So when calcium will react with oxygen, the 2 electrons from calcium will transfer to oxygen. So what will be the number of electron in calcium now? It was originally 20, but now it will left with 18. And what will be the number of electron in oxygen now? Originally it was 8, but now it will be 10. But they are not isoelectronic because they don't have the same number of electron in the atom. In the question they ask which compound contain isoelectronic structure or same number of electron in the outermost shell. So it cannot be option A. Option A is not the right answer. Then we check option B. Option B is potassium bromide. So option B is potassium bromide or KBr. When we check the position of potassium, this is the position of potassium and it is having 19 electrons, potassium atom. And when we check bromine, here is bromine and it is having 35 electrons. This is for potassium atom and bromine atom. But when they react with each other, potassium belongs to group 1, it will have a charge +1 or it will lose 1 electron. And bromine belongs to group 7, it will have a charge -1 and it will gain 1 electron. How I am calculating the number of electron, Abdullah? As you can see, we are finding for a compound potassium bromide, okay, KBr. This is the symbol of atom potassium, 19 and 39. So it means potassium atom contain 19 proton and 19 electron. So if there is a potassium atom, it will have 19 protons and 19 electrons. But we need only electrons. Same thing for bromine. It is 35, as you can see, so it will have 35 proton and 35 electron. This is for atoms. But when ionic compound is there, what happened? It's not between the atoms, it is between the ions. So potassium, as it belongs to group 1, so it will form potassium ion with a charge +1, and bromine belongs to group 7. As we know, the valency for group 1, the valency is +1, group 2, the valency is +2, group 3, valency is +3, group 4, -4, group 5, -3, group 6, -2, group 7, -1, and group 8 is 0. So when potassium and bromine will react with each other, potassium will form a potassium ion, which will be K plus, and bromine will form bromide ion, which will be Br minus 1. So in potassium atom, there are 19 electrons. But because in ionic compound, ions are formed, so it will form potassium ion. How many electrons will be there? 18 electrons. Because it loses 1. Positive ion means it is a loss of electron. And bromine is minus 1, so means it is having extra electron. Originally it was 35 according to the atom, the proton number, but because it gained an extra electron, so how many electrons will be there? 36. Again, you can see this cannot be a right answer because both atoms are not having the same number of electrons. Is it clear why option B cannot be a right answer as well? So when we check the option, the second option, so it cannot be a second option as well. Now when we check the third option, it is magnesium oxide, because we want that option in which both atoms, both ions will have the same number of electrons. So magnesium oxide, this is magnesium, which is having 12 electrons, and oxygen is having 8 electrons. But when magnesium oxide is formed, because magnesium belongs to group 1, so ionic compound are formed between the ions. So magnesium atom will form magnesium ion. So if magnesium atom is having 12 electron, how many electrons will be there in magnesium ion of charge plus 2? If magnesium atom is having 12 electrons, how many electrons will be there? So because it loses 2, so magnesium ion will have 10 electrons. And same thing, oxygen belongs to group 6. So as it belongs to group 6, the valency will be minus 2. So oxygen charge will be minus 2. Oxygen atom is having 8 electrons. But oxygen minus 2 ion means it is having 2 extra electrons. So how many electrons will be there? 10 as well. So in this example, both the ions have the same number of electrons. So that's why the option is magnesium oxide. As the question was, in which ionic compound do the metal ion and the non-metal ion have the same electronic structure or same number of electron? That's why C is the right answer. Why not D, like sodium chloride? So when we check the sodium chloride, so sodium atom contain 11 electrons, this number, and chlorine atom contains 17 electrons. But because ionic compound is between the ions, so sodium will lose electron. How many electron it will lose? As it belongs to group 1, so sodium will lose 1 electron. As it lose 1 electron, sodium will form a positive ion. And chlorine belongs to group 7, so it will gain 1 electron, so it will form a negative ion with a charge minus 1. Sodium atom is having 11 electron, sodium ion will have 10 electrons. Chlorine atom is having 17 electron, but chloride ion, because it gain an extra electron, so it will have 18 electron. So in this example as well, sodium ion and chloride ion does not have the same number of electron. That's why option D is also not correct, or it will not be a right answer. So it was not D, it was not B, it was not A, it was C. Is it clear? Then the structure question. In a structure question, potassium iodide is an ionic compound. Describe what happened in terms of electron loss and gain to potassium atom react with iodine atom. So potassium reacting with iodine. So we have potassium which belongs to group 1. So means it will have one electron in the outermost shell. This is the last shell I am drawing, not the complete structure of potassium. This is only the last shell of potassium, which is having one electron in the outermost shell. And iodine belongs to group 7. So as it belongs to group 7, how many electrons will be there in iodine? It will have 7 electrons in the outermost shell. Again, this is a valence shell or outer shell, but not the complete atom. Now what happened? Group 1, they will have a charge +1. How it will have a charge +1? The potassium will lose electron and iodine will gain that electron. So when potassium will lose one electron, what will be the charge on potassium? It will form a positive ion. And when iodine will gain one electron, the charge on the iodine will be -1. And the attraction between the ions is known as ionic bond. So in the question they are asking potassium and iodide is ionic compound. Describe what happened in terms of electron loss and gain when potassium atom react with iodine atom. So what happened in terms of electron loss and gain? So potassium having one electron in the last shell and it will lose that electron to form a positive ion. And iodine belongs to group 7, or iodine having 7 electrons in the last shell and it will gain one electron from potassium to complete octet. Octet means 8, forms a negative ion. So metal will lose electron whereas non-metal will gain electron. Yeah, even if you write this answer that potassium is a metal, it will lose one electron. Iodine is a non-metal, it will gain one electron. That's also correct. You will get the marks. The distribution of the mark here, one mark is you have to just mention that there is one electron transfer. If you mention use the term 1, you will get 1 mark. And if you mention electron transfer from potassium to iodine, you will get the second mark. Then next question. Describe the structure of solid potassium iodide. Now, if you mention like potassium lose electron and iodine gain electron, you will get the mark as well because that is showing that electron lost from potassium and gained by the iodine. And if you, the second mark is for mentioning that one electron is being transferred. Describe the structure of solid potassium iodide. So in ionic compound, how do ionic compound exist? The ionic compound exists as a lattice. So in ionic compound, we have a lattice of positive and negative ions. And again, it is of 2 marks. So how you will score both marks? So positive and negative ions are arranged in a regular manner or regular pattern, which we call a lattice. So what is the mark distribution here? How you will score the mark? You will mention there's a regular arrangement of positive and negative ion in a giant lattice, because it's a very big structure. That's why we use. So what is the distribution of the mark? If you may use the term lattice or you use the term regular arrangement, you will get 1 mark. And the second mark is for mentioning that in the lattice we have both positive and negative ions. Then explain why potassium iodide is having a high melting point. So why a substance is having a high melting point, melting or boiling point depends on force of attraction between the particles. So we will say they have a strong attraction. There's a strong force of attraction between positive and negative ions, or we can also say ionic bond. Or we can say ionic bond, strong ionic bond. And the second mark, that greater amount of energy is needed to separate the ions from each other. So we need lot of energy or greater amount of energy to separate these ions from each other. Yes, force of attraction of ionic bond is strong. That will give you 1 mark. And the second mark is you have to mention that you need lot of energy to separate the ions, because in more energy means higher temperature. Is it clear? This part, the third part as well. Then another question, magnesium react with sulfur to form an ionic compound. So magnesium is a metal here and sulfur is a non-metal. How many electrons are there in the last shell of magnesium? 2 electrons. So metal always lose their last shell electrons, so magnesium will lose 2 electrons. And sulfur, how many electrons are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 electrons are there. So how many electrons it will gain? It will gain 2 electrons. So we have to complete the structure. As the magnesium is a metal, it will lose all of its last shell electron. So when it will lose its last shell electron, what we are left with? We are left with only inner shell electrons, because the last shell is completely lost, or the last shell will be empty now. So even you can draw this shell and the last shell empty in exam, that is also right way to draw. Or some student do not draw the last empty shell, that is also the right way. So both ways are acceptable. You draw the last shell without electron, or you draw the electron of the second shell. That both ways are acceptable. And because the magnesium is losing 2 electrons, so what will be the charge on magnesium? the charge on the magnesium will be +2 or 2 plus. As a sulfur, it's gained 2 electron. So already there are 6 electrons belongs to sulfur. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 already belongs. And 2 it take from magnesium. So the charge on the sulfur will be -2. Yes, we are not adding a shell, Abdullah. As you can see, there are already 3 shells, 1, 2 and 3. So if you transfer electron, actually 2 electrons transfer from magnesium to sulfur. So now in the last shell of magnesium, there is no electron. So you can draw this as an empty, or if you don't draw, that is also a right way. An electron transfer to the sulfur, sulfur is already having, because we have to complete a figure here, this figure is not complete. As you can see, sulfur is having 3 shells, 1, 2 and 3. And in the figure, they only draw 2, 1 and 2. So actually the third shell, they did not complete for us. So we have to complete. And how we'll complete? Already 6 electrons are there. Already 6 electrons are shown. Then what we have to do, because the 2 electron transfer to this sulfur, so this will be 1 and 2. The charge will be -2. And here magnesium loses its last shell electron. The charge will be +2. Is it clear? So I did not draw any extra shell. It was there in the first figure and I just completed the figure to show that sulfur gains 2 electrons. Is it clear? Then in second part, they're asking ionic compounds such as magnesium sulfide does not conduct electricity when solid, because ionic compound in a solid state, the ions are not free to move. Magnesium sulfide does not dissolve in water. Magnesium sulfide does conduct electricity under certain condition. State the condition needed for magnesium sulfide to conduct electricity and why magnesium sulfide conduct electricity under these conditions. So solid magnesium sulfide does not conduct electricity because ions are not free to move. When it is heated, or melted, ions are free to move. That is why it can conduct electricity in molten or liquid state. Is it clear, this answer? That why a solid magnesium sulfide, because all of the ionic compound in a solid state, they cannot conduct electricity as they don't have the ions, their ions are not free to move. But when you melt it, the ions become free to move, ions have space to move. That's why all the ionic compounds, when you melt them, they all can conduct electricity, but not in a solid state. Not a single ionic compound in a solid state can conduct electricity. Why? Because ions are not free to move in a solid state. Then aluminum oxide is an ionic compound with a high melting point. Complete a dot and cross diagram to show how electrons are arranged in one oxide ion present in aluminum oxide. Include a charge on oxide ion. First, we have to complete oxygen, because we know oxygen is having an oxygen atom, it is 8 and 16. So it is having 8 electrons, the oxygen atom. So how the electrons are arranged? The first shell, it will have 2 electrons, and the second shell, it will have 6 electrons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When you, this is oxygen atom. So when you check the position of oxygen, oxygen belongs to group 6. So if oxygen belongs to group 6, how many electron it should gain? Group 6, the valency is -2. So how many electron it will gain? So it will gain 2 electron. So this is oxygen. Even they did not complete the structure of oxygen, because oxygen atom is 8 and 16. So first shell it will have 2 electron, and second shell it should have 6 electron. This is oxygen atom now. But what happened during a reaction? Oxygen ion should form with a charge -2. So it will take 2 electron from aluminium. So this is 1 and 2, and the charge will be -2 or 2 minus. Is it clear? We just have to complete for oxygen, one of the oxygen. Then why the melting point of aluminum oxide is above 2000, and explain why aluminum oxide is a metal oxide. It's an ionic compound, and ionic compound are solid at room temperature, because whenever you have any ionic compound, a compound which contain metal and non-metal, these compounds are ionic compound, and ionic compound are solid at room temperature. So when you have aluminum oxide, in aluminum oxide you will have a lattice of positive and negative ions. So the question is, why aluminum oxide is having a high melting point? So again, the same reason as we did in the previous question, that there's a strong ionic bond, a strong force of attraction between the ions, and we need greater amount of energy to separate the ions from each other. So all these ionic compounds, they all have high melting point. Yeah, aluminum oxide is a solid at room temperature. All the ionic compounds are solid at room temperature. Yeah, if there is a greater charge, it will have a high melting point. That's true, Simon. Is it clear, this question, that why aluminum oxide is having a high melting point? Then complete the table. This question we already did. For silicon, we'll use the periodic table. Silicon is having 14 electrons, so it will be 2, 8 and 4. Calcium atom is having 20 electrons, but this is a calcium ion, so it will have 18 electrons. And electronic configuration is 2, 8 and 8, whereas nitrogen atom is having 7 electrons, but it's a nitrogen ion, so it will have 10 electrons as charge is -3, so it will be 2 and 8. Then predict the formula of a compound of calcium nitride. Yes, Abdullah, that's correct. Calcium nitride formula, so calcium is +2, nitrogen is -3. When we cross multiply, it will be Ca3 and N2. Then we have to draw lithium chloride. So lithium belongs to group 1. So as it belongs to group 1, it will have 1 electron in the outermost shell. And chlorine belongs to group 7. So it will have 7 electron. We just have, as I mentioned, show the outer shell electrons only. So chlorine belongs to group 7. So it will have 7 electron in the outermost shell. Now what happened? Lithium will lose electron and chlorine will gain. So when lithium will lose electron, there will be no electron left with lithium. And the charge, like no electron in the outer shell left with lithium. So the charge on the lithium will be +1. And chlorine gain that electron, so the charge on the chlorine will be -1. Is it clear? This is the ionic structure of lithium chloride. Now in the question 3 part 2, you cannot say aluminum oxide is solid, so it will have high melting point. You have to mention a reason, Abdullah, that aluminum oxide is having ionic bond between aluminum and oxygen. That's why it is solid or having a high melting point. Can structure change of an element? Element structure does not change. The structure of an element remain same. Question 5, a minute left, so I'll share another link and discuss this question 5. You can write higher force of attraction or strong force of attraction between the ions. In this part, whenever they say why ionic compounds have high melting point or why ionic compound are solid at room temperature, so what should be your answer? You should mention 2 points. Number 1, strong force of attraction between the positive and negative ion or strong ionic bond. That's one thing. The second thing, you need lot of energy to separate the ions from each other. That's why it is having a high melting point. I'll share another link for question 5 discussion.